It's all in your head. You don't look sick. Your tests are normal. It's probably anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you. Have you heard these words from physicians, family, and friends? If you're someone who has been struggling and swirling through the revolving door of healthcare to find answers about your health, or if you know someone who is going through this experience, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast with Laura Noziga, a show dedicated to exploring the challenges of living with undiagnosed or rare medical conditions. This podcast explores both sides of the bedside. We will be speaking with patients who have had challenges with finding a diagnosis, along with experts in the field. I'm your host, Laura Noziga. Please note I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur, and I am an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Hello, and welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. I'm your host, Laura Noziga, and today I am here with Pam Cusick, who is a lovely lady, and I'm so excited to be talking with her today. A little bit about Pam before we get started. Pam is an experienced market research professional with more than 30 years of expertise in study design, implementation, and analysis. She has a background in public health communications and research and a passion for patient advocacy, which I'm really looking forward to talking about today. Pam earned a BA in psychology from Sweetbriar College and an MA in psychology from the New School for Social Research. She is the past president of the Board of Directors and Scientific Advisory Council lead for the Horses and Humans Research Foundation. Pam is the senior vice president of a company called Rare Patient Voice, and she will tell us all about her company. She has a lot to share with us today and talking about very important things like patients being involved in market research and all kinds of health-related research. And I think she has some intriguing stories as well about patients that she's come across along the way. So Pam, thank you so much for joining me today. So lovely to see you.
Sure thing. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'd like to just kick things off with talking about what Rare Patient Voice is all about, because it is a rare and unique, certainly, name of a company. I'm sure folks would be very interested in knowing what Rare Patient Voice is all about. And I know there's a really cool history behind it as well. So tell us about that, Pam.
Absolutely. So Rare Patient Voice is 10 years old. We're just celebrating our anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
And we connect patients and family caregivers, so parents or of children who are sick, or adult caregiver or adults who are caregivers of their parents. We connect them with research opportunities. That includes everything from market research, so focus groups and interviews and surveys, all the way through clinical research. We have started out with the way that we started out is we go to events. So we would go to the National Hemophilia Foundation Conference or National Sickle Cell Conference and set up our booth and explain what kind of research people would be involved in. And when they sign up with us, they aren't under any obligation to participate. But if they do, they earn $120 an hour. And so over the past 10 years, we've paid patients over $10 million.
Wow.
Yeah, for the participation in research, which really is, they are the experts in their conditions. So, they know more about their everyday experiences and how their disease is impacting them than their doctors do. So getting their opinions and getting their insights is really important. We now are in 9 countries, so the US and Canada, and then the UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Australia, and New Zealand. And we invite patients not only with rare conditions, but with all types of medical conditions to join our community, because there are a lot of clients out there who need to hear from all types of patients with very common conditions as well as very rare conditions. We have since 2013, we've done over 8,000 projects. and, involve patients in all kinds of interesting things. Some, with usability studies, which for your listeners may know what that is, but, usability studies are things where you might try out a website or you might try out a device to see, how do you use it? And are you, how do you interact with that? We've, all the way through, we had a client who created a clothing line for people with mobility issues. And so they wanted to have people test those things out and see what worked, what didn't, and how they could improve them. So there are a lot of very interesting things that they can participate in.
Patient Voice, I know, does a lot of cool things. And I think for a lot of folks out there who know that I am a moderator, I facilitate market research. I have spoken with a lot of patients who have come through from Rare Patient Voice. And we know, Pam, that we're all patients, right? So I always hate to keep saying patients. I prefer, yeah, we're just people with a something. Everyone's got a something,
That's
right?
something.
But speaking of patients, they want to help. Patients always want to help, and having being I feel like I'm my own podcast because I certainly have a story as to why I even started this podcast out of my own patient experience and having to advocate for myself for something that's still kind of iffy, but I think we're getting there in terms of getting some answers, and it's so hard to get answers, and that's why it's so great that patients want to help, and you're a resource for patients who want to get involved in research and help their own cause and help find answers to their own diseases and condition. Many years ago, Pam, I used to work for a company that recruited patients for clinical trials, and we would hear a lot of feedback about how certain types of patients or maybe certain cultures, things like that. Some people are just in general, people are really hesitant about participating in research. What do you hear from folks about getting involved in really any kind of research?
So I think, COVID did a lot of bad things, but one thing that COVID did was help people understand more about clinical trials. They heard more about clinical trials and the different vaccines being tested. So it wasn't kind of as much of an unknown as it was in the past. There are people who are a little skeptical, across all, ages and races and ethnicities for a variety of reasons. But I think that, the more that they hear about clinical trials and understand that, that's how drugs come to market, that's how, we get these different treatments and cures. I think, what we find in our community is most people who sign up with us, they want to help with anything.
Mhm.
So whether it's an interview or a clinical trial, they will try to, enroll and, go through the process because they do want to help other people coming after them. There are so many inclusion and exclusion criteria around clinical trials that, you know, you may have a large community of people that kind of funnels down to maybe 2 or 3 people get through the process, and, it's based a lot on, what drugs have they taken in the past and, where they are in their disease journey and things like that, so not everybody can qualify. So getting the word out about clinical trials and how important they are is, a really an important thing for manufacturers because they need a large number of people to get the statistically significant results they need to move to the next stage. Another thing that came out of COVID were decentralized trials. Sure. So you see a lot of the things that we might have, wanted patients to go to a particular site to do, if those things can be captured at home, if they can be done via Zoom, there's some parts of trials that are, being done in the home or at a local site. And again, patients have opinions about that too. There's some patients who feel like, yes, come to my house. I don't want to leave my house. I want to, you to come here and take all these, do all these different tests and, draw blood and whatnot. And other people who I've talked to who feel very strongly that they wanna be at an actual research institution or a site because they feel like if something goes wrong, they want to have, the whole staff there that could help them. So I think they're very individual differences, and it might have to do with the type of medical condition you have and, and how at risk you are for side effects and so on. That might impact whether you would be interested in a decentralized trial. But I think that's another part of, what we saw with, during COVID, where people were more likely, they were happy, in some cases participating in a telehealth appointment. And then other times they really want to see their doctor and be hands-on and have that doctor talking to them. So I think the same is true for trials. The one thing that I know that is also very helpful is there are organizations out there that provide support for patients in trials. And I really didn't know that was a thing,
Interesting. Yeah.
for
Support in what way?
so they provide travel arrangements. They'll make the arrangements and pay for, say, flights and hotels and
Wow.
meals, you know, babysitters if they have children at home. I mean, a good example is I have a friend who they live in Massachusetts, but she was traveling her child who was in a wheelchair to a trial in California multiple times a year, but she had other children at home. And as a mom had to figure out how to coordinate all that. There are organizations out there that actually help with those things and help to make that easier because, it is in the sponsor's best interest because if you can make it easier for the patient to stay in a trial, so enroll and then stay in for the long haul, you're more likely to have, the numbers that you need to get your drug to approved and so on. So it's a, I don't know how many trials use those services and what percentage of people have that offer to them, but I think it's a really neat thing and would make it easier for so many people to say, "Sure, I'll travel across the country 4 times a year to do this because you're going to help me figure out how I'm gonna get there, how I'm gonna get a transportation for a wheelchair, not only, to the plane, on the plane, but then to my hotel and then to the site." There are a lot of legs that, you have to really think about when you're traveling sick people to a specific site or people with they're not even sick, but with different challenges.
Sure.
It makes it more complicated. And, if it's not easy for me, I'm gonna say no because my life is complicated as already as it is.
Yeah. We almost need our own airline for folks who have these challenges that would make things so much easier. Sounds like in a lot of ways it's almost like a domestic travel tourism company almost that does that type of thing. Because transportation, I know in the past has been an issue for a lot of patients who might want to participate, but they just can't get there. And of course, if they're in a state of not feeling well, which is most likely the case, it's even harder to get access to a trial. Pam, what would you say as far as folks that you come across along the way? What do you glean from people that's kind of a constant in terms of the people that you meet at these different advocacy conferences that you go to or very specific outreach kind of events that you go to? What would you say is kind of a common thread that you see? Or maybe not, but what do you see that's typical?
That they want so a couple things. One, that they wanna share their experience to help other people who might be coming onto the same journey. So, if it took them 10 years to get diagnosed and they might be able to share insights that would make it easier for someone else, they wanna help. They wanna share those insights. They wanna be asked, they wanna be involved. Don't make decisions about, you know, me without me. And so that's, that we hear that a lot, that they really do wanna be involved and they want to be able to share their voices and their experience. And then, I guess for a lot of people, and this is, you and I are researchers, but, a lot of people eh, don't know that they can be involved in research.
Uh-huh.
They'll come up to the table and they'll ask, "Well, what is this about?" And I'll explain it and they'll say, "Well, why would someone want my opinion?" which,
Oh,
they don't
wow.
realize the strength and the power and what they can bring to the table. And I think that's a really beautiful thing because, helping them, realize that they're the expert in their condition and they have valuable information that can help, people to create better products and services. It's a very powerful thing. And, we have patients who have come back to us afterwards to say, I didn't realize that I had so much of value to say, and it really changed how I feel about myself and my condition, and so, that's a really gratifying thing that we are able to connect people with these opportunities that help them to kind of realize their own value and how they can, share and make things better for, either their own family themselves, but other people as well, and that's a really beautiful thing.
Mhm. It's really too bad that people would think that, well, why would anybody want my opinion about my own experience? Because it is so individualized, and yet at the same time, I think a lot of times patients have not so great experiences with the healthcare system. And we hear things like, and I'm certainly have heard a lot of comments through my years of moderating and now with this podcast with people saying, well, they told me that my tests were normal and you don't look sick. And all of these kind of pigeonholed, marginalizing kind of comments that they're hearing. I even heard from one patient just last week that I interviewed who said, well, I've had these symptoms all this time, all these years, and I keep going to all these different doctors. And I wrote down my notes and I was very diligent and I made sure I looked nice and all these things because she wanted to avoid what I would call some patient profiling also with assuming a certain, demeanor or persona of her. So she made sure she looked nice. She was all buttoned up with her questions and her story and she said, "I felt like I had to make sure that the doctor would like me."
Mm,
So, it's interesting when you hear these stories and then to hear that some patients say, "Well, why would they care what I have to say?" is really disheartening and luckily when you and your company have a resource and an outlet for those folks who do want to tell the story and you are kind of on the reverse showing that you use the term sponsors, so that could mean a pharmaceutical company, it could mean another type of healthcare related organization like a device company, something like that. That you're showing that these companies and manufacturers who take care of us really do want to hear the stories of patients.
right. Well, I think, to your initial question, I think that they feel that way because we are trained to listen to what your doctor says. Your doctor says you need these tests. Your doctor says you need these vaccinations. Your doctor, and so historically, it's, oh, my doctor said I should do this, and we do that. Not what do you think, Pam, but your doctor said you should take this. And so I think that is part of the reason that some people don't realize initially that, they have that power and they have that information that the doctor doesn't sit with you. They don't know what happens when you get out of bed in the morning. They don't know that you can't lift your arm up over your head and you can't reach the coffee cup because they're not sitting in the house with you. And when you are talking to your doctor for that, 15, 20 minutes, you're not telling them that. You're telling them something else about, your side effects or this or that. But the fact that you can't reach your arm over your head might really be very important for one reason or another. Also that you can't get your coffee, which would be really important to me.
Right.
But,
Yes.
but it
A lot
might
of
be
people, yeah.
exactly, but it might be something entirely different that they'll never know because they're not there with you 24/7. So I think it kind of comes from that historical doctors know everything and we should just listen to what they say. And they do know a lot, but there's some things that they don't know. And that's where the patient is able to fill that gap and share so that then a company who is creating a solution for them can make something that actually works, that actually addresses whatever their true needs are. Because if one a side effect is that whatever you're doing or taking impacts your mobility, maybe that's a really bad side effect that, I can't do my dishes, I can't do laundry because I can't move my arms, whatever those things are. A company would need to know that, because no one's gonna wanna take something that causes side effects that impact their life worse than some other symptoms that they might have.
Yeah. What have you seen? So, we talk a lot about patient advocacy and being an advocate for yourself. I'll ask this question first. How would you define it in terms of what advocacy is?
Well, I mean, it's so advocating for yourself is one thing, and then advocacy kind of groups and organizations would be different. So, patients advocating for themselves is, how ask for accommodations, at home, in the workplace, to your doctor, and explaining that, yeah, this isn't just a made up symptom. This is, something that's really happening to me. And so, you know, feeling that strength and power to say, this is my life. Here's what's happening. And I'm going to, advocate for myself in terms of making things better for me or for my child, depending on where you are. And then, advocacy groups, I think, are, it helps to kind of pull that strength and power together, right? Because you have a group of people who have that same, have had that same lived experience, and can then help you to figure out, okay, well, if it's a let's say it's a mobility issue, and then here's some things that you should tell your employer, and they can help you to kind of give you that support to, make a difference in your life. They also do so much work, with lawmakers, and trying to get bills passed that make life better for patients for one way, in one way or another. So they're kind of different. They're different, but they're the same. The end goal is to make things better for patients. And I think that, for what an individual can learn from those advocacy groups is how to continue that in their personal life, so that if they have a need, if they have a medical condition that, requires some, what I mean, can't think of a million things off the top of my head, but, that you're working from home, but because of this condition, you need to, take a break from a screen for, 4 times a day. Your employer needs to, you need to feel the strength to be able to say that to your employer. Yep, I'm, productive worker. I can work all day long, but I need to actually be, away from the computer for 2 hours a day. And so I'm going to adjust my work schedule from here to here. And most people don't really feel that they can do those things. And so I think, one of the things that an advocacy group can do is to help you to realize that that's your right, and that's your, yes, you're a productive worker and do a great job. Just because you can't stare at a screen, you have to have a break, specific breaks during the day from that, actually, may make you an even better worker. Right. But, if you don't feel like you can ask for that, that can be a real problem. So I think, sometimes those larger groups can help give people the information and the strength and that they need to be able to make those changes in their lives.
Mhm. We talk a lot about the patient, but so much of this involves caregivers as well. How does rare patient voice get involved with caregivers also, or do they have an opportunity to get involved with research as well?
Yes, we have a lot of caregivers who have signed up with our community. So we have over 125,000 patients and caregivers. And those are, I think it's probably mostly patients, but it depends on the disease. So if it's something that impacts children more so, we have a lot of caregivers in a particular community as opposed to the patients themselves. But, a lot of times it is, the companies that we work with want to talk to the caregivers because the patients, has one perspective, but, if you're a child, you're not dosing yourself, you're not, kind of working with your everyday kind of strategies and how you get through the day. And so the caregiver's input is really, really important because you can't get it from the patient a lot of times. We have a lot of studies for, elderly people with Alzheimer's, dementia, and it's the child who is their caregiver in a lot of cases, or the spouse who is their caregiver, sharing that information about, okay, well, here are some of the things that, my mom or dad experiences where, like pain points where they could use some help. And that's where we get a lot of caregivers, sharing their experiences. And we also have sometimes where it's a situation where they want to do a dyad. They want to talk to the patient and the caregiver at the same time,
Right.
and get both of their perspectives. So it really depends on the kind of on the disease area and how impacted the patient is to be able to share their own voice, because a lot of times the caregiver has to be their voice.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's such a huge role with the caregiver and the family overall in terms of how some of these conditions affect everyone around you. So it's not just your condition, it's everyone's and how it affects them in different ways. Some folks listening might wonder, so if I give my information to this company, what do they do with it outside of research? Or how do they use my information? How secure is it? How would you address that?
So we work with a company that called Q1 Tech that has, a very secure portal where we keep all of the data. It is, compliant with our US laws. It's GDPR compliant, which is a European security laws. And we keep that information in the database and use it to be able to so if a client comes to us and says, okay, we're looking for these patients with this condition, and so many patients and so many caregivers, then we can send invitations out only to those people who might qualify. Because as you can imagine, people they don't want to get a whole bunch of irrelevant emails.
Sure.
We all get plenty of
Like all of
irrelevant,
us, right?
right? So they
Like,
wanna get things that are, specifically targeted to them. So we use the information they provide, and we only ask for, kind of some basic information. So their name, their address, the condition or conditions that they have, their medications, and they optionally can add their race and ethnicity. And then that helps us to then figure out when we have a client who comes to us, who to send those invitations to. We don't sell their information to anybody. We don't share access to our database or to the patients. And if they ever, for any reason, don't want to be involved in research again, all they need to do is ask us and we'll take them out of the community.
um, yeah, that's why I hope out of this podcast more people connect with you and we'll leave some information about how folks can connect with Rare Patient Voice. But Pam, when we were talking prior to our podcast time today, you had a few stories about folks that you had met along the way that maybe took them a while to get a diagnosis and kind of moving along with the theme of the podcast as well. Do you have any success stories that you've heard about folks who did find a diagnosis after looking for a while to give a name to their symptoms, or maybe someone who was just so frustrated that they're still looking for a diagnosis? What kind of stories have you heard?
I mean, there are a lot of people who are still looking, that's for sure. On average, I think, in one of the recent studies that we did, it could take 7 to 10 years for some, rare patients to be diagnosed. So everyone who has signed up with us, though, has a diagnosis. So they've gotten to a place where they've been diagnosed, but you know, the frustrations and the misdiagnoses are quite common, especially if it's a rare condition or you don't fall into the right category. So I can think of one person who was, young and diagnosed with, or they diagnosed her with lupus. and, sent her off on her way. But it didn't quite seem right. And she ended up doing a lot of her own research and found that she had esophageal cancer,
Oh,
but she
wow.
didn't really fit the profile of a person with esophageal cancer because she was young and didn't smoke, whatever, those different criteria were. And that's why no one diagnosed her that way. And she did her own research, and that's how she, came to that diagnosis and got treated and is well and living a full life. But I think probably the common factor is that people don't give up. So if something doesn't smell right, doesn't seem right, like, oh, you just have fibromyalgia or you just have whatever. Oh, don't worry about it. They keep digging, they keep reading, they keep, connecting with people and, trying to isolate these different symptoms that they have that might actually be something else, and then bringing that back to their doctor. I think I see more of that now. We talked a little bit about why people wouldn't feel that their experience or their voice was important, but I do think that people are feeling a little more empowered now,
Mhm.
and if there is something that, they've gone to Doctor Google and they've looked up everything and they're like, "Look, here are the 5 things that this might be." I don't know if 20 years ago, if you had dug up that information, not from Doctor Google, but elsewhere,
Or
if you felt as comfortable bringing that to your doctor, but now you can say, "Okay, well, this was in the Journal of American Medical Association, and this was in this was in this, and here are these things that, that my symptoms match," and bringing those forward, and I think those are the cases. There's a lot of frustration when you're misdiagnosed and you're misdiagnosed again, and there are opportunities that are missed for treatments and preventing some of the latter side effects that, if you had been treated now,
Mhm.
these things might not have happened. And I feel like people now have so much at their fingertips that they're looking these things up and they're not just idly sitting by like, "Oh, well, the doctor said I had this. I guess that's what it is. And now I got to just sit around and wait." They're not waiting around. They're, going through and trying to, connect with other people and connect with, journals online and figure out how their symptoms might match up with something that is a little bit, maybe not as common as their doctor might think.
Yeah, it
And it
doesn't just
could
fit,
be
like I like to say in my on my website and my video, that it doesn't just fit in a box that you put a pretty bow on it, and here's your diagnosis, here's your treatment plan, and the patient gets sent on their way. I'm sure the patient and the doctor would like it to work that way on a
wouldn't
regular
that be great?
basis. Yeah, but that's not how it works, and you're right, I think things are shifting and that people are more comfortable bringing that other research that they've done on their own with the proverbial Doctor Google and say, "What do you think of this and what do you think of that?" And I know that there's a lot of doctors who are probably, subliminally rolling their eyes at that, but they get so I would like to hope that maybe doctors might look at it as patients helping them as well, because we all know that doctors don't give a lot of time to patients anymore because there's a variety of factors that limit them to the time that they do take with patients. And maybe they're just not in a mode where they can think through all the possibilities, or as the clinical term of, what's on the differential, what are all the options on the list. So I think that has shifted a lot. And I think back to what does it mean to be an advocate? That's a lot of it, doing your own research.
Right, and I think that's kind of the beauty of some of these advocacy groups pulling that information together. Although I will say, and one interesting thing, a study we did a couple years ago was about patients, how they feel about advocacy groups working with pharmaceutical companies, and one of the questions we had asked was, if you are you working with an advocacy group? And over 50% of the patients and caregivers we talked to said they were not working with an advocacy group,
Oh, wow.
which, where we sit today, we think, "Oh, well, of course, everyone works with an advocacy group," but that's not true. And we asked why. If they weren't working with one, why were they not? That they didn't either know about one in their disease area or they didn't have time to, go and look for one. So, it was striking that people were not necessarily availing themselves of that, the information that a group might provide. Because I think, when they're pulling together, they meaning the advocacy group, they're pulling together research and they're pulling together, a registry and some natural history studies and information that can be beneficial to patients. Those patients who are not participating or not involved, they're doing their own work and kind of could be shortening that process if they knew about an advocacy group. I don't know what the answer is
Mm.
there, to like, get people more engaged with advocacy groups, but I think it was interesting to me because I thought there would be a much higher percentage of people involved in advocacy groups.
Yeah. Yeah, and some people might just think, "Oh, an advocacy group, that's a support group where everyone's just kind of talking about their issues and not everyone needs a support group or wants one," but certainly not knowing that it's way more expansive of benefit to work with an advocacy group just from an information standpoint or advocacy groups who are keeping you updated on what new treatments might be available for your condition, et cetera. So there's probably just a lot of misinformation or miscommunication on what an advocacy does and doesn't do. So
Right.
um,
Probably true.
yeah, yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for your gut and listening to your gut also. Like the lady who was diagnosed with or misdiagnosed with lupus, and she pushed for finding other answers. I know for myself personally, I had a muscle issue where I had a head twitch and a muscle spasm on the right side of my neck, and I saw a couple of neurologists, and they both told me I had something called cervical dystonia, and the first one wanted to shoot me with Botox, and the second one said, "No, do not do Botox." So, and it turns out it wasn't a diagnosis to
Oh
begin with.
my gosh, wow.
I could have been getting Botox injections unnecessarily, but I think if it doesn't feel right or you feel like you need to be getting a second opinion from another physician, in my situation, I think I was on the 3rd or 4th at that point because I wasn't my gut told me I wasn't convinced that that's what it was, but I think intuition and just listening to your own brain is in your own voice is really powerful too. Yeah. So Pam, what are some of the categories that where patient voice is really looking for patients to help with market research? Are there some places that you need more help in than other? I'm sure you welcome everyone, but are there some areas that need some help?
Oh boy. Well, we do welcome everyone. We have over 1,400 conditions that are currently represented. It's every week we get something different. I could, pull up a little list over here while we're talking, and it could be, a hemophilia study, hemophilia B. It could be, there's a lot of work being done in cancer.
Mhm.
So, we get a lot of skin cancers and, brain cancer and things like that, as well as, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. One interesting thing now that I mentioned prostate cancer is, women participate in research more often than men. So when we have a prostate cancer study, we may have a lot of people we can send an invitation out to, but the response rate is much less. So we can always use more prostate cancer patients because, we do get a lot of requests for that. And we have, it's harder to find the patients who want to share and discuss their stories. We also have, and this is not disease specific, but we do get requests for people who use feeding tubes, as an example, or wheelchair users. So it's not always by disease. It might be by some other specific factor. Just, quickly looking at this list, multiple sclerosis, ulcerative colitis, primary immune deficiency, and the list every week changes.
Goes on, yeah.
It's, where there are products being developed and there's work in a specific area, we'll get a lot of requests for those specific disease areas. And then, next year or next week, it's something entirely different.
Yeah. Real quick, Pam, let's talk about men for a minute here. So what is it about the men who are less apt to participate in research?
I think it's just women are, I mean, this is going to sound completely sexist, but that women are used to sharing about their conditions and kind of sharing a little more openly about, medical issues and sensitive issues. And men are not as maybe as comfortable or don't want to share for one reason or another. So I think it's just and of course there are plenty of men who do want to share, and there are plenty of women who are like, no, thank you, I'm not talking about that. So there is variability. But I just think in general, women just share more and it's in the caregiver part of it, it's also women are more often the caregivers of a parent or of a child who is sick, not to say that the dads aren't involved because they are, but a lot of times it is a mom who is signed up as a caregiver of a child with a genetic condition or a childhood issue. But I think it's just maybe your nature that we talk about women talk about things. We talk about, breast cancer and a lump and, things that impact us pretty openly with, with our colleagues, our friends, and things like that, and I don't know that men are necessarily as apt to talk about things like that as much. There are a lot more commercials right now on, that you see for, like, erectile dysfunction and things like that, which I think is trying to get men more comfortable talking about issues, but, I mean, I think that women are just maybe it's just more common for us to do it.
Yeah. We tend to be a chattier bunch either way, but I think we like to help solve problems too. I think that has a lot to do with it too, and help each other. So I would hope that more men would consider being a part of research because there's so many conditions obviously that affect them as well, even beyond something very specific to the male anatomy, I guess you would say. So hopefully more will participate. So Pam, tell our listeners how they might be able to get involved with Rare Patient Voice and get their name on your list and have an opportunity to maybe participate in a research study. This would be for market research. Do you recruit for clinical trials also, or
Yep.
just market
Yep,
research?
market research and clinical trials.
Okay.
So they can go to our website, which is www.rarepatientvoice.com, and there's a link that will say sign up, and you can click on that, add your information. We'll have a team goes through and adds that to the database, make sure everything is, in there properly, and they'll send you an email to confirm, you to confirm that you signed up, just to make sure that's not someone else trying to sign up in your name. And then when we have a study that is matches what you've signed up for, we'll send you an invitation and off you go.
Yeah. I've had some patients ask me, well, what are you doing with this information? And will we find out what happened with it? I've had some patients ask me that question. Did they ever ask you that question? Yeah.
So most of the studies that we're involved with, it's not our data. We're not collecting the data ourselves. So it's very uncommon to get the results back, unfortunately. But we do several studies internally every year and just to keep people engaged because as you can imagine, not every condition is it has something in development at this time. So we want to make sure that people stay engaged and interested and we share the results of those studies back with the patients
Ah, that's
so
great.
that they can get some of that information. And we do also share, we have a newsletter that goes out once a month and we'll share a little bit of research that we've done so that they can see how their voice makes a difference and what kind of, yeah, I participated in this and I want to know if everyone said what I said. And so they do get that. I'm sure there may be clients who do, share results back. And I know in clinical trials, there are people who want to be able to, they want to know, I participated in this, what happened? And, so that's really up to the trial sponsor or to our client to share that information. But a lot of times it's proprietary and they don't. they're making decisions about things moving forward, if it's a market research study or, maybe some other decisions based on that information. But it never hurts to ask.
Yeah.
They might send you something back.
Yeah. Well, I love you guys and everything that you're doing and your mission and what you're looking to accomplish. Pam, thank you so much for being with me today and having our listeners learn more about research and getting involved. And I will make sure that Rare Patient Voice information is in the show notes so folks know where to contact you. Thank you so much for being with me today. I so appreciate it.
Terrific. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, me, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com.